In the final days of writing his travelogue, he wrote, "The end of my magical exploration of the southern continent." As he explored the world, he realized there were still many truths about magic he didn't understand, which made him think the title of Grand Magician seemed inappropriate for him. His master, Sylvania, who passed away at a young age, remained in his memory as a beautiful woman. In hindsight, even those colorless days were actually very eventful. The sadness that eroded his heart the day he lost his master has now manifested into an old photograph over time. While for a person who lives a long time, sometimes, the memories of longing appear again, the regret of losing something sometimes numbs the mind, breaks the natural order and distorts the truth. Indeed, sometimes there are moments when the feeling of wanting to once again see the face of his master unexpectedly appears, but what has been lost, no longer exists. The grieving person must strengthen himself, unfortunately, so. He told his granddaughter, who witnessed the end of his life, to strengthen herself. To her, which marks the end of his life, he dedicates the last sentence of this book. Lucy, Magic Travelogue in the Southern Continent, quote Glocked, Lucy was unable to stem her tears as she watched her grandfather die in front of her eyes. Back to the present, Lucy still missed her grandfather, more than anyone else. She knew Glocked himself recognized and took his death in stride, therefore, she had no choice but to let him go. A question then arose. Will there come a day when all the pain of loss is healed and even the wounds disappear, something that helps temporarily forget? The longing is a bag of jerky in his pocket that satisfies. But she was disappointed when the bag turned out to be empty. She then looked down. There she saw Mug speeding towards Janica, who was cooking the dishes, and while Mug was whispering something to Janica, a very terrible aura then appeared around her. Lucy could only be confused and surprised when she saw that, in the Trix Hall, the main conference room, the sage's scroll handover ceremony was taking place. The scholars were selling, while the merchants were buying the sage's scroll. Only the top figures from each party were gathered. Among them, the attention was focused on the chairman of each party, among them, Lortel Ketchon, interim president of Elt Store, and Abel Faucius, principal of Sylvania Academy. While looking at him, Lortel thought, the same age, the same impression of him, but far different from that person. The person she meant was Crefin Roth Taylor. After the negotiations for the purchase of the sage's scroll were completed, he came to see her, and he asked her to hand over the sage's scroll, and to hand over the sage's scroll to Crefin. She had planned to do that from the beginning, so it was nothing to worry about, but still, this could not justify the big lie she told to Princess Phenia. Lortel at that time set a price of 12,000 gold coins to him. Although she asked for a price that was quite expensive, he accepted the offer and would buy it immediately. He even gave her an information. With a smile, Crefin asked, did she know that Elt had hired a mercenary to head to Sylvania? He asked her to be careful, make sure everything was not problematic this time. He was an unfriendly man, but it didn't matter. The information related to Elt was valuable, and he managed to find a person who was willing to buy the scroll. The preparation was complete. At the sage's scroll handover ceremony, Professor Glast was the mediator there. He said, Abel Faucius has relinquished his authority as the user of the scroll. He then invited Lortel to come forward to become the new user. Now she will have the transaction profit as well as the purchase certificate. No, rather, she will have full rights to Ed. A huge feeling of excitement rose from her heart when she thought about it, but, when the ceremony seemed to be going smoothly, a magic circle suddenly appeared on the floor below them, and many giant golems then appeared from there. When they were blocking the golems, they were then surprised, when they saw Professor Glast taking the scroll, with the sage's scroll in his hand. He then disappeared from there. Based on that, we know who the cause of all this is. Lortel could only be stunned when she saw it. She looked very unwilling to see her full rights over Ed had been stolen before her own eyes. Even though Ed Roth Taylor did not appear, the story continued without problems. The last chapter of Act 2. The Glast showdown battle began, in Professor Glast's secret laboratory. When Isla had just regained consciousness, she was then shocked and panicked when she saw Ed in front of her. She also asked why he was here. Hearing Isla, who kept shouting, Ed then told her to be quiet. He also thought, at this time, Glast should have taken the scroll. While looking out of the prison, Ed said, if she keeps shouting like that, the underground waterway monster in front of her will wake up. Seeing them both awake, Cum, the holy study researcher, said that they were lucky. Professor Glast told them not to use them as experiments because they were valuable individuals. Hearing that, Ed casually asked, really? Cum said he was calmer than he thought. after all, while he was reviewing the research data, he would be keeping a close eye on them, so he warned them not to think of anything. Hearing that, Ed just sat there casually because he knew there was nothing he could do at the moment, while Isla herself was now feeling tremendous fear and anxiety. Ed's plan was simple, he just needed to wait, and Taylor would bring the subjugation group to cause a riot. The library that Taylor had passed must have collapsed by now, in this place that could not be touched. Taking all the magic engineering formulas from various magic books would complete his mission. There was no activity, nothing to do, and nothing. The only thing that bothered him was how smooth this was until it made him a little uneasy, as well as the fact that made him a little helpless was, he had to be here with that girl, so he then tried to interact with her, but when Ed called her, Isla immediately screamed and warned him that if he moved one step, she would scream. She also threatened to bite her tongue. She said that she was very serious and not lying. Ed could only be dumbfounded to see that. He then said that he had no bad intentions towards her, if he intended to hurt her. There was no way he would miss this good opportunity, right? That seemed to calm Isla a little. Seeing that, Ed also thought, if he had to feel from Taylor's point of view, of course he would think well of Isla, maybe, but Isla then said that he must be lying, because he was Ed. Hearing her disbelief, Ed then just told her to stop her nonsense, and sit down. He also said, if they waited, Taylor would definitely come. But Isla looked offended to hear Ed say Taylor. She said that he had no right to call him names like that. Hearing that, Ed just asked, why not? He also apologized for what happened during the entrance exam, but he had his own reasons, and he also helped during the Glaskin incident. Even though she didn't trust him, she could believe in Taylor. He would definitely come to save her. Isla really didn't expect to hear the word sorry come out of Ed's mouth. Ed could only sigh at that, but he was then surprised when he saw Mug heading towards him. Mug worriedly asked if he was okay. Was he hurt? Was there a scratch on his arm? Did he feel weak because of the magic reaction? Was his vision clear? Was there a problem with his sense of smell and hearing? Whether the tips of his arms and legs felt normal? Whether there was a sense of fatigue or tiredness? Whether he felt dizzy or his heartbeat was erratic? He followed his magic reaction here, but because his spirit level of consciousness was still medium, it took a little time to track him. Mug then apologized for not arriving sooner. Seeing Mug, who was so chatty, Ed then stroked his head and asked, where have you been? He also said that he found him well here. Isla was shocked when she saw Mug in Ed's hand. She asked if he could control spirits too. He was surprised because in the previous semester, his basic magic ability was poor. Hearing her question, Ed just said that it was none of her business. He was also thinking, finally there was someone sane to talk to. Not caring about Ed's bitchy tone, Isla then said, if it was a spirit, he could send an emergency signal to the outside. They can send a request for help to a student or professor who can sense spirits. Hearing that, Ed just thought that he didn't need to add variables like that. Mug also told him that he didn't need to worry. Even though he couldn't guarantee his safety, he was trained in emergency obstacle reports more than anyone else. Ed was then confused to hear that. Mug explained, it took about half a day for him to get here, then avoiding being caught by the many researchers, golem guards, and monsters. It had been about 2 days since that day, but still clear in his mind. Miss Janika's furious expression at that time was really beautiful. Her goosebump-inducing anger was sincere. Not only that, the merchant box girl and the little witch girl wearing the witch hat who always visited the cabin said they wanted to cooperate. With all that, they were almost like a big army, so he told him not to worry. One way or another, the rescue rope would eventually come down here. He asked him to just calm down and wait here, but Mug couldn't help being amused when Ed suddenly stroked his ear, but instead of the happy expression he saw, Mug then trembled in fear when he saw Ed's bad expression. Isla was also confused why his expression was like that. Ed let out a short breath, then threw Mug far away. Ed then called the researcher who was watching his cell, and said that he changed his mind. He couldn't stay here, he had to get out. With a tone of urgency, he then told him to get him out of there right now. Hearing his request, the researcher only said, if he continued to make noise, the demon from the other side would wake up. Hearing that, Ed hurriedly said that this was a serious matter. If he didn't come out, they would all be in big trouble. The researcher certainly didn't believe that. He laughed at him and thought, after peeling off the layers, he was just an ordinary student. And he then just left there. He also told Ed to shut his mouth. Isla was surprised at his sudden change of attitude. She then asked why he suddenly panicked. He said if they waited quietly, Taylor would come to save them. Ed did not answer and just sighed helplessly, with the key to the prison cell in his mouth. Muggs then returned to him. Muggs admitted that this was what he had ordered. Muggs did not know how he knew where the key was, but with his accurate instructions and actions, he managed to get it. He then handed the key to him and said, with this he can get out now. Ed could only be dumbfounded to see that this shithead even did something unnecessary without being told. Muggs seemed to mistake Ed's throwing annoyance earlier as his instructions, but with this, he managed to get out of the cell. But Isla was then shocked and confused, because when Ed came out, he then locked the cell again when only she was inside, and when Isla was about to ask him, Ed told her to shut up and only answer yes or no from now on. She was then confused to hear that. Ed then explained regarding his actions. Outside there were various kinds of research subject monsters and magic artifacts that had spirits, anyway dangerous. For now he told her to just follow his orders, and if they realized that he was missing, he told her to tell them that he ran away. That way, they wouldn't hurt her. After all, she couldn't even run around with her weakened legs. Isla was then surprised to hear Ed knowing that, but when she was about to ask, Ed asked her not to argue. With a sharp look in his eyes, Ed then asked whether she would obey him or not. Isla seemed to be a little scared when she saw that. She then nervously answered yes. Hearing that, Ed said that was good. He told her to stay calm and don't move. He would handle this, and he then stepped forward. Even though he had read the strategy guide, unexpected new things certainly could not be prevented. If it's a small variable, he can still handle it a little, because his stat has increased significantly. So most of the obstacles can be overcome by using the information he already knows, but of course, there are variables that he can't handle by himself. Even if Janica and Lortel join this riot, he seems to be able to handle it. But, when he heard Muggs say that Lucy also came, Ed thought, even with hundreds of hours of effort, even the most intentional players couldn't find a way to deal with that invincible enemy. Bad ending 27, Slothful Lucy. It's an event that won't happen unless we accidentally, so he didn't pay much attention to it. A bad ending that is sure to happen if the conditions are met. In the strategy guide it is written, if the conditions are met, Slothful Lucy will appear in an aggressive state. This guarantees a bad ending, so be sure to avoid it. The initial conditions of the event are: after the incident, Professor Glass crossed paths with Lucy Merrill. After remembering that, Ed then determined that he had to stop Lucy from coming here at all costs.